Hello, beautiful people, and welcome to the Occult Explorers. I'm Snappy, and I'm joined, as always, by my dear friend and co-host, Dion. How's it going, Dion?
We're still breathing. We're still here.
We're still here. Life is beautiful. We continue. We go on. We carry on. And we're back with part two of our deep dive into the occult world of espionage. This is going to be fun. But before we begin, as always, we want to give people a warning. We're going to get weird and wild and occult. We're going to be getting into the realms of speculation. And remember, all of the opinions expressed are just ours. We're just having fun. This is nothing more than a good time. And if you take it seriously, that's on you. You have anything to add, Dion?
Yeah, with the trigger warning stuff, usually we talk about body fluids and ancient rituals and sacrifices, but politics. Woo!
Oh wow, yeah, that's a trigger of a different kind. And we're going to be getting into it today. So, what do you have in store for us with your presentation?
Uh, well, with politics and the occult, how they're related. Um, does one inform the other? Is one a result of the other, cause and effect? And I would dare to say that all these secret societies are tied up in politics from day one. And a lot of our most influential characters from history were agents of espionage. Um, it's just a running theme.
Well, this is one thing that I think that a lot of people are just not perceptive of or not aware of. I don't know how to say it in a kind way sometimes, but the reality of a lot of religion and especially of myth is that it's propaganda. And that the reality of a lot of propaganda is that it's myth and religion, and politic. All of these things are intertwined and are intrinsically related to one another. So there is no talk of magic in the occult world without talk of politics, without talk of cultural manipulation, without talk of that kind of espionage, and it shouldn't be surprising, but it is surprising at the same time when we look at many of the greatest magicians or wizards or witches or what have you, these empowered individuals, they're also spies. They're also connected to the military. They also invested in empire or some other form of imperialist ideology or what have you. It's kind of wild when you start to break into it.
Maybe things are not as accidental as they seem, or even
No,
that famous saying, "Things are not what they seem."
right?
Um,
There's this ongoing battle for perception, right? Trying to control the narrative, trying to make people see something a certain way, you know? We see it a lot more so much in a recent political reality because of the internet. You can see like conflicting narratives on full display, right? Both sides claiming that they have the hard evidence and willing to like sacrifice their lives for their side, and they're in strict and drastic opposition to one another. It's like
yeah.
it's so striking, and it's all made up. It's, you know.
Well, in modern times, that dialectic or the enemy, creating these different sides, uh, had different reasons back in the day. Today, we have a third character involved, which is sales,
Mhm.
because creating these divides on social media drive sales,
Yeah.
advertising.
Well, I
Before that
was
wasn't the case. Before it was just the church and state competing for your mind. But now we have the advertisers.
absolutely. And advertising is a different type of magic. Capitalism is a different type of magic. And it's something that we have to be aware of, that consumption magic, right? Because it's equally trying to take away your agency, but it's trying to just sell you nonsense. It's trying to sell you platitudes. It's trying to create and give you an identity, but these identities are ultimately flat because they have nothing to offer, right? And they don't want to offer you anything, so that you're constantly searching for more. If they were to give you anything tangible, it would defeat themselves.
Yeah.
It gets into this wildness, right? It corrupts. That greed corrupts everything. It makes it less, and it's a stark reality that we have to deal with. And yeah, capital has always been a motivating factor, but it has only grown and grown and grown in influence and strength, right? Where now it is the defining factor, right? It is the defining force, right? When you look at businesses now, they rival countries. The only countries that don't rival businesses are China and the US, but it's China, the US, and then American corporations, right? Every other country is kind of, this is why Trump can threaten the whole world, because there's only one other player who could potentially do anything.
Well, we got another player on the chessboard that's actually interconnected to everyone in the Great Game. That was one of the titles for this series, because the Great Game was originally coined 1800s and 1900s to describe the competition between Britain and Russia for real estate in Central Asia and around the world at that. And I see it as a metaphor for today, because we live in a game, a political game, we could say. And last time we left off with John Dee.
We did. We had talked about John Dee. And for today, for my side of the presentation, after you do yours, I'm going to be talking about, I'm continuing, but I'm going to look at Crowley. And it's kind of wild. I decided, I wanted to do the same thing, right? You hear with John Dee, I was like, I heard all these rumors. John Dee is into, espionage and empire magic building. And I was like, what's the truth? And we went and discovered it. People should go back and watch that episode. It's a lot of fun. 007, The Queen's Eyes, right? Interesting magical stuff going on. Crowley is really interesting in all of that. He saw himself as the reincarnation of Edward Kelly, right? John Dee's medium that helped him in his Enochian magic. And Crowley is deeply connected to a lot of this wild espionage. We've all heard about Crowley's connection to World War II and to his, he wrote a bunch of really, it's satire, it's political propaganda satire, but it is Nazi nonsense. And he was engaged in this. And it came to light afterwards, and Crowley insisted, eventually it was backed up by Edvard Fielding, who is the Secret Service agent who appears throughout Crowley's life, that this was Crowley's attempt to defend empire, and this was part of his role as a secret agent, something that he had been doing since childhood. And it will be fun. I get into it. There's this book that I found. I'm trying to remember the title. I have it when we do my presentation. We'll get into it, but it's a lot of fun. Crowley is an interesting character, and it goes far deeper. I don't even get to the World War II stuff. In World War I stuff. I just start at the beginning, and the speculations right from the get-go. Crowley is a spy. It's interesting. What do you find, though? What do you have for us?
I'm going to go back to England. Go back to England and also in honor of Ryan Seven in England there. Remember the 5th of November. This is going back to the 1600s, 1605.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Gunpowder Plot.
Yep.
Catholic Revolution. This is going to be a theme when we get to Crowley too, because there's this whole wild energy around Europe that people who aren't we're not European, and we don't have that history. And unless you're really interested, you just don't know this stuff. And there's this whole thing about the Carling bloodline and monarchism and establishing of royalty and the Roman Catholic Church, the universal church, and going back to Charlemagne, right? And all of these legitimists, they call themselves, or monarchists, and they all are invested in Catholics. They're all invested in this extremism of bringing a unifying Catholic Carling bloodline to rule over all of Europe. And
Yep. Yep.
Guy Fawkes is accused, if I'm correct, I don't know that history 100%. But Guy Fawkes is accused of being one of these Catholic supremacists, a legitimist, wanting to change the monarchy in the UK. He objected to the Protestant Anglican Church.
Yep. Well, you summed up most of it. Yeah, go. We'll hit the first pick.
Okay.
And I won't go super deep into history of Guy Fawkes and everything. One of the things is the mask, the cultural icon of it, the imagery.
This is such wild magic.
Yeah, that it's held over to this day, and it's become synonymous with anonymous.
Yeah, it's had such a wild cultural. This is something I love to show people as just and how magic takes on a life of its own, and how it evolves and influences the culture, and how it transcends art and artists. You know, this begins with Alan Moore, right? Back in I believe it's the early 90s or late 80s. But Alan Moore creates this character, and it's originally this anarchist character. And it's a clear kind of magical invocation designed to invoke an uprising against this technocratic, encroaching, like this technocratic supremacist state, this fascist state. And it was clearly about inspiring this anarchism, this revolution. And what's interesting is they were using imagery of the past, right? Guy Fawkes was a character that had undergone the magic of satire, who had been stricken and turned into a demon, right? If you talk to people from the UK, they know Guy Fawkes Day, when you even had these sayings, get a penny for the guy. And what that's about is they would get money together to buy fireworks and fire material to set ablaze effigies of Guy Fawkes, right? They turned him into a pariah. They turned him into the representation of anti-government, anti-statism, right? And so what does Alan Moore do? He uses that anti-government, anti-state, that hatred, and he manifests that as an anarchist ideal. He flips the pole. He embodies that empowered satirical image. It's freaking radical and it's beautiful. But
Yeah.
there's the image is complicated too, because Alan Moore he's completely disassociated himself with it in modern times, because it's a capitalist thing, right? That anarchist image is now owned by Warner Brothers. That mask is copyrighted, right? And so like Alan Moore's like nowadays, he doesn't even want to hear anything about those kind of creative works. Don't even bring them to him to sign. He's disowned them because they're pure capitalism. And he has said that he is very happy about Anonymous and other groups that have been clearly inspired by the imagery that him and his co-artists created and developed. You know, and he does acknowledge that it's similar. It's similar to his original intention, which is beautiful, that magical intention continues on in spite even of its creator, who's completely severed all, you know, he's like, I'm completely disavowed. I have nothing to do with it anymore. You know, good luck to Anonymous.
Well, you know, it's ironic that there was that saying in a previous episode where we kill our icons, or it's destructive how you burn Guy Fawkes, and then how he let this go. Because in part of the story, Guy Fawkes was a patsy.
Mm.
He was found with all that the weapons. Nothing ever exploded. It was like a setup. If you go to the next image,
Oh, I didn't know it was a setup. I thought they caught him red-handed trying to commit the.
well, as part of
no.
it, they caught him red-handed. That's a good. Everything's just there, easily to catch. People have talked about that, and this deals with Catholic, Protestant, France, England, secret societies, monarchy, different. There's a lot of different political elements tied up there. And here's the word patsy, because I was curious what the word patsy means. So I've heard it so many times. When someone's a patsy, it's a fool.
Of course. Of fucking course, he's the fool. That's Dionysus, the dying and rising god, the one that's sacrificed, that's ripped apart and reborn, right? The green man.
yeah. And so it's found with all the explosives, these gunpowder, you say, in barrels. That's the genie in the barrel that we've talked about, harnessing that power, that explosive fire, that energy that you can call down to explode, but never got to set it off. And part of it was to kill King James, so they could put, I think, Mary Stuart, which is a different reign.
Jacobite. This is a big thing. There's the Jacobites, and they want to ensure an English line upon the throne of England. And then Queen Victoria and her lot that come later, they're of a Germanic line, supposedly. I mean, all of these wills are related, but this means a lot to these Jacobite legitimists, these monarchists, these, Carlists, right? And this is serious magic and mayhem. Right? Serious magic and mayhem. And it's amazing that you're talking about this, because it's going to legitimize aspects of my presentation later.
Well, so you said the word monarchy and monarchist. So they're playing a game, monarchy. So at a certain point, when you were a king, divine right, no one questioned that. It was just different kings fought amongst each other for the throne. At a certain point, people started questioning the monarchy, like, well, hey, I don't want to be ruled by our king or queen. And then you had the church stepped in, and you would need a priest to confirm your divine right to rule. And so that's why churches and state are tied up together in this, with the monarchy. That's how you maintain it. So look at the next pic. This is 1669. And this will tie into a lot of different things. It's the Man in the Iron Mask. This is from a cover of Dumas, Alexander Dumas, that wrote his book, because it's very occulted in lots of different ways. But I actually wanted to get into the actual story of itself. There was a prisoner, arrested and put into an iron mask by Louis XIV. And Voltaire claimed that it was his older brother who would have the divine right to rule. And there's competing secret societies. It's been alluded to in different French literature, because there's the Order of St. Louis, and this deals with the Sun King, the divine right to rule. And there's a competing other society that wants to put the real Louis in charge. And it also deals with Freemasons. It's Masonic, we could say, are Masonic elements, and secret societies. And here, like I said, Dumas' version, which incorporates musketeers and occultism, and even Dumas himself. What were you going to say?
Twins, the magic of the twins, right? You have this idea that there's a twin brother to the king, right? This is a super powered magical image, right? One twin has to be destroyed so that the other can rise, right? That's the Dioscores. So we see one twin is imprisoned and suffers, while the other twin gets to be the absolute monarch, right? It's truly a magical occulted image.
We've talked about it with Solomon, because there's a lot of Solomonic magic that's at play in being a king or leader. getting leadership, fighting for leadership in societies that support each king. And it's part of these, like I said, these secret societies. And what's funny, go to the next image. Voltaire, because Voltaire had mentioned, and some people didn't know who Voltaire is. He's an author, French author. That's connected in a lot of ways to a lot of different happenings as well, political stuff as well, discreetly. And here's one of his sayings I liked. I disapprove of what you say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it.
We have to understand that this time, okay, when Voltaire is around, when what's happening in Europe in the 17th, 18th centuries, you're having the radical birth of democracy and free states, and they're challenging the divine right of kings. And how is this coming about? You're getting, what's interesting is you have competing philosophical and you have competing magical traditions. One of the things that a lot of people neglect to talk about, or they don't make a big deal out, is these Enlightenment thinkers that used magic and secret societies to try and bring reason and rationality, the same kind of philosophy as Voltaire. The most infamous being Adam Weishaupt and the Bavarian Illuminati, right? They were a Enlightenment reason-based society. They were all about trying to enlighten people and to bring about these values of liberty and equality and democracy. And this was radically destroyed and vilified because of their clandestine nature, where they had these spy networks, but also because of the threat they represented to the monarchy.
Yep.
Right? To the monarchy. And so you have also Alpheus Levi was famously a leftist communist, a radical socialist. These and also deeply connected to the magical world, right? And also deeply connected to Catholicism. There's a lot of interesting stuff in radical politic that you see within the magical world, because at the same time you're seeing this radical freedom, democracy, and socialism, there are also these extraordinarily monarchist movements, these divine right of kings, these, they believe in these divine hierarchies with the secret chiefs and these absolute patriarchal authorities that are determined through the bloodline, right? So it's wild. You get both of them operating in these Masonic kind of organizations, and it's everywhere at this time.
Yeah. So, and you could have like you said, the example of someone who's looks like they're promoting free thinking, but behind the scenes, they're still connected to a monarchy, a secret society. Or it could be the other way around. You could have both. There was a lot of things going on. Hit the next pick.
Yeah, some secret societies were Enlightenment democratic, right? Others were monarchist absolutist, right?
So we were talking about the Iron Mask, the Man in Iron Mask, and a lot of this deals with these King Louis at this time frame. There's a lot of stuff going on that we've talked about the characters surrounding them in past episodes. We just didn't talk really about the King Louis themselves. But they were, we brazed on it. Remember the affair of the poisons was one with Lavoisin, and we talked about a psychic and a herbalist that was poisoning people surrounding King Louis's court, his courtesans, and to get political favors, and they had to get the French police involved in to try to capture, this psychic on the loose. You know a lot about this.
Yeah, this is one of the most wild and interesting stories for Lavoisin, and people should go look it up. It was one of these stories that was stricken from the record, so it's only known through tales and exaggeration and evidence after the fact. But what it's about is there's this psychic, but more so than a psychic, she runs a infamous kind of mafia business where they're engaged in performing abortions for the elite, and selling of secrets. So they would do things like perform abortion rites and whatnot, but then they would hold that over people's heads and use that to manipulate people. And it was this huge, massive organization, this crime organization built around abortions and drugs and psychics. It's wild, wild stuff. And it eventually got exposed because not because of anything Lavoisier did, but because she was approached by one of Louis. I can't remember which Louis. It's been a while since I thought about this, but
the 14th.
Yeah, Louis the 14th. His courtesan approached Lavoisier, and they had worked together several times before to get rid of other mistresses who were close to Louis, supposedly, or for abortions. But she had a connection to this seedy crime boss woman, Lavoisier, right? And what ends up happening is the courtesan asks Lavoisier to kill the queen, because she's desperate to be closer to the king, and she's worried that she's going to be replaced, lose her influence. And so Lavoisier doesn't agree to do it. She freaks out and leaves. But the secret police had been following the courtesan. And so then they realized, oh, it's Lavoisier. And then they exposed this insane operation Lavoisier was doing, where it gets truly wild. Like, that was the satanic black mass stuff, where not only was she performing backyard abortions, she was doing black magic and casting curses for these extreme rich, affluent nobles. And these nobles wanted them to perform these horrific satanic rites in order to ensure their success. So she engaged in this ridiculous level of performance in theater, where she had an actual bloody priest. She had these virgin girls, and they would take these aborted fetuses and literally rip them apart in a sacrificial rite and consume the flesh to ensure that these black magic curses would work. And so when this becomes exposed, it's like such a insanity. People in France are still talking about it. It forms the basis for a lot of like radical literature, like Là-bas. If people are interested in this, check out that book, Là-bas, Down There, Hell. Who's the writer again? Anyway, continue. You go ahead, Dion. I'll look up the writer.
Well, part of the thing was the local press and the information network hyped it up even more. It made it even crazier than it was. So, and part of it became so that when you went to her to do a spell, she would have to send one of her poisoners to go poison that person. So it would seem like her spell was effective.
Absolutely.
Because that's part of black magic, in the world of Santeria and voodoo and all that stuff. People don't know, even in modern times, when they go to these high end and pay a lot of money to get these black magic spells done for the narco guys and mafia guys, that black magic person collects the money, they do a big ritual, but they also might tell their associate at the back door, hey, go poison that dude. Just go kill that person, you know?
Absolutely, right? And what's wild is you look at that lady Lavoisier, and she looks exactly like one of these narco shamans or one of these African warlord shamans. You know, this stuff is still happening exactly in the same ways today, invoking the same insane taboos and doing the same violent and crazy drug stuff. Like, you just have to look. It's just terrifying, you know? And the writer's name for Là-bas is J.K. Huysman.
Yeah. Yeah. And all that fits into this. Because it's how this stuff is packaged up in modern or their literature at the time, along with politics, to influence politics. Because this is all about politics right here.
Oh yeah, because part of the problem with Lavoisier, right, is like we're saying, is that they tried to cover it up. They said no one can talk about it. We're going to hide all the evidence, and so then the press went wild with it.
Yeah,
you know? It just made it worse.
And they eventually found some records in a floorboard
Yep.
in the diary. But part of it I want you to see here is 14, 15, 16. Because they're interrelated. One is the grandson of the other. They have a good run, but they're corrupt monarchists into the occult politics, dealing with England, Germany, Russia, Britain, Catholic, Protestant, secret societies. They're at the cusp of all this and maintaining their empires while being the divine right sun king. Go to the next image. Because onto this playing field steps this gentleman right here, the Count Saint Germaine, who's a character that I've heard for so many years in the New Age stuff. You might go to a meditation circle, a New Age bookstore, and there'll be some Saint Germaine stuff. But Saint Germaine was also involved in political intrigue. Was arrested for spying.
Right. We don't even know who his real name is. Right, like he's this wild man adventurer, and everything about his early life is all up for speculation, you know. And he's just this kind of just this 18th century wild man. Right?
Oh, definitely. This is around what 1750, and he was employed by Louis XV. Because we were talking about 14, 15, and 16 of these King Louis. And you know what King Louis hired him for? To do dye making research. And he set up a factory to conduct dye making experiments. Now, in the different ways you mess with these dyes is you can have secret inks, you could have hallucinogenic psychoactive dyes, explosive dyes. There's a lot you could do. We've had different episodes. We've covered the dye making potentials. You know, it's ironic in modern literature or in folk literature. He's supposedly at the Declaration of Independence.
He's all over the place. Right? He's this like grand theatrical guy. He's a mime. He's a philosopher. He's a writer. He's a magician. He, you know, like you're saying, he's at this point in the height of the 1800s. Like he's at King Louis XV's court. Like just, you know, and then he's employed to become a spy. It's, you know, and we don't know enough about him. He's just this interesting wild character, you know?
which was used as a Guy Fawkes type icon for QAnon.
Wow.
We know in modern times they played around with the Saint Germain I am iconography as part of their movement. You know, we've talked about that in the past, different things. So King Louis set up his own spy network that's famous in history called the Secret du Roi, the King's Secret. Because sometimes the King's Secret was against what was good for the state, or what the affairs of France or the monarchy. It was more to protect his occult or his affairs with women or freaky stuff. That was part of the King's Secret, was his secret police force to cover up shit, to spy on his own relatives, his own people.
Well, there's so much interesting stuff, and he was around so many interesting things, you know. It's wild to me. Like I remember, where I first heard about him was in the New Age stuff, Manly P. Hall talking about it. And when I started to look into him a bit, though, you start to find all this radical stuff. Like he's just all over the place. Like we're just talking about the Bavarian Illuminati. He was friends with this prince who was a member of the Illuminati. And there's all this speculation that he himself was a member of the Illuminati.
Of course.
You know? Like it gets wild.
You know, well, there's another figure in history that's just as elusive that changed characters. Go to the next image. And here it is, the Chevalier dion, who was a effeminate man who could easily pass as a male or female.
Yep.
Without a lot of work, not a big old elaborate thing, just effeminate naturally, had a certain look.
Eventually they lived the last part of their lives as a woman.
You know why? King Louis XVI recognized them officially. Otherwise, they would have had problems.
Right? She lived her life as a woman and became, it's wild. So she's probably, it's hard. It's hard when you're talking modern language to put modern identities on the people, but she's certainly some kind of gender non-conforming person, someone of a trans persuasion, right?
Yeah.
It's wild that she was also this incredible badass spy. Just to her advantage,
Was in the order of St. Louis, would go on secret missions out of state to different countries, messed around in the occult, and in the last years wanted to be recognized as a woman and lead a peaceful life.
Yeah.
And had done a body of work involving espionage.
It's a lot of people too who are involved in diplomacy, in connected to the spying as diplomats, because Chevalier is a diplomat, and so was Saint Germaine is a diplomat. Crowley, we're gonna find out, was a diplomat.
Yep.
And pursue that.
And as well as, like you said, the Bavarian Illuminati. Let's go to the next image. Because part of I was talking about the magic ink with Saint Germaine and the secret societies, ears to hear and eyes to see. These are some of these spectacles that Ben Franklin designed. And I want to throw in Ben Franklin around the time of 1776, because we got to talk about America too, because at this time, America's popping off.
Right.
Because supposedly Saint Germain's there hanging out with them. And it's these secret societies, Masonic societies, interconnected, that revolutionary societies, some are pro-monarch and some are anti-monarch. And so there is infighting inside the Masonic societies as well. And Ben Franklin talked about the Hellfire Clubs. He went there with Sir Francis Dashwood to the cave, talks about going to the cave where they talk about politics, besides talking about their Luciferian poems or whatever.
Well, one of the big things too that a lot of people neglect, that Neil Gnostic Informant brings up on a couple of his videos, are the anacreontic societies.
Sure, yeah.
The Greek magical society, because a lot of them, they just thought it was boys' clubs to sing songs and get drunk, and that's part of it. But at the root of that is Dionysian magic and revelry and democracy in pursuit of these Greek ideals and this evolution, this celebration of literature in the Greek language, and these were everywhere, right?
Yeah.
National anthem is an anacreontic song.
Which is the original version is wild. We did an episode of that one before. They got into some of the anacreontic roots, which we won't talk about today, but definitely Franklin and them were into that. Yeah. That was part of their building, because once they got in power, they built the infrastructure of America, Washington, D.C. to look like Greek temples. All laid out.
Also, we got to mention, and it's extraordinarily important to mention, is the Haudenosaunee, which we've talked about, and the democracy of the Iroquois Confederacy and the First Nations peoples, because many Americans were just effing off and joining the natives, and there's a lot of the democracy and a lot of the idealism came from looking at the indigenous neighbors and wanting something similar and needing to compete, right? Needing to offer something that was competing, right? Like, why am I going to join your society when it's this monarchist hierarchy Christian nonsense, when I can go join the indigenous people and they have democracy, right?
And their democracy was birthed out of trading. Out of sharing space. It dealt with non-ownership of land.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. And at the same time, you have the Bavarian Illuminati popping off.
Yeah.
Because what's happening is you got different movements around Europe are questioning the monarchy. They're trying, before it was throwing off the shackles of the church, or now it's the shackles of the monarchy. Because even though these houses, royal houses, are competing, some of them have the same bloodline. They're mixed, and it goes from being all Charlemagne to all Plantagenets to Stuarts or different
House
ones.
of Bourbon, House
Yeah, yeah.
Stuart,
And then later on,
Charlemagne, Carlingist. It's crazy stuff.
then you get the Romanovs later on, like Romanovs and Saxe, Gothic, Coburg, which is the modern Windsors, but that modern Mountbattens and all them intermixing now, it's like the Romanovs we'll see are part of it. But the names change, but there's still royal families that are interconnected through blood. So go to the next image. Because so Ben Franklin, 1776, a Declaration of Independence, meaning against the monarchy. We're free from the monarchy. Now we could set up some independent Masonic democracy. It's 100% Masonic. If you look at all the original paintings and such, they're doing Masonic rituals where George Washington is King Solomon right there.
Yeah.
And building a Solomonic temple, laying the cornerstone, wearing Masonic outfits and aprons and robes, and doing it. And not only that, they would do it on solstices and equinoxes and on grids laid out like ancient Egypt.
It's because, like, at the essence of these fraternal organizations, especially ones of a Masonic origin, is that fraternity, right? Like, look at the foundational state declaration of the French nation, right? It's equality, or it's liberty, egalitarian, like equality, liberty, equality, and fraternity. Those are the three statements. Those are all Masonic ideals: liberty, equality, fraternity, right? And these ideals manifest democracy. The whole point of these kind of Masonic organizations, many of them, like we discussed with the Illuminati, was about getting people to aspire and to refine and to embrace these high-minded ideals, to embody their best selves, to engage in fraternity, to strive for equality and for liberty,
Yeah. And so because of that, the different monarchies had to set up their own secret societies to infiltrate this stuff and compete against this stuff. Like, what's this now? Like, they're throwing off of the yoke. Like, you can't have that, especially when you're trying to build empires and colonize the world. Then you have your cousins or your nephews trying to use Greek ideals against you.
Well, there's a reason why. It's again, look at the satire at play. It shouldn't be surprising to anyone that the guys pushing for democracy and for freedom, the Illuminati, are the ones that are vilified and turned into the clandestine secret order that's actually controlling everyone. That's like literally the exact opposite of what their stated purpose was.
Right.
And but this is all in service to the powers that be, right? To the authority, to that hierarchical monarchy, right? That image is vilified for a reason.
Yep.
It's interesting.
So 1776, around this time, we have this American Revolution, and they set up this new world here. That's a mixture of old Europe coming to these lands and colonizing, taking over. Then you still have the monarchy or the royal houses in Europe that are still in a state of flux as well. This is like, say, 1780. Go to the next image. I want to talk about a character here in her nice red and white. The Tsarita, Katarina, Catherine the Great. Because she has a role, and the people around her have a role in what's going on even today.
Absolutely.
there's always been a struggle. Her or her people's internal struggle versus an external people fighting over things, demographics, fighting over real estate, geography. But one of the things I want to talk about is Catherine the Great. Is some interesting things is Cagliostro. The infamous Cagliostro ended up going there. She was entertaining a lot of different French Enlightenment authors to help her shape Russia. You know, the Russian Empire, what's become. Some of it was birth of her relationship with the occult in Europe at that time.
It's interesting you bring up Cagliostro, because when I think of Saint Germaine, Cagliostro is immediately who else comes to mind, because they're very comparable figures. I mean, there's a little bit more known about Cagliostro, but he's this crazy Italian adventurer who engages in Egyptian Freemasonic magic and plays at the various courts of Europe and is doing all this really magical, interesting stuff.
Before they get him, because she kicked him out of Russia, and his weird revolutionary Freemasonry stuff that was a threat to her throne. She wrote a play about it called The Deceiver, where she made fun of Cagliostro. But what's interesting is she still entertained the stuff along with these different authors to come there to use that as fertile stuff for Russia. You know, the thing is, she's famous for a few different things. Supposedly she had 22 lovers.
Oh, wow.
And, you know, she goes down in history as she had a voracious appetite. And she even met with Voltaire.
Oh, interesting.
Voltaire went to meet her. And that's part of this French Enlightenment informed Russian empire growth along with Egyptian Freemasonry. Because Egyptian Freemasonry, Cagliostro. Now, this is a theme that I want to throw into empire building and empire destroying and the behind the scenes of occult and politics. There is a little Egyptian Freemasonry there, a little thread that we could pull. But let's go to the next image.
Yeah, well, this is important actually, because Cagliostro, in terms of the occult world, becomes a key figure, right? A key figure in establishing Egyptian magic, right? And again, the Egyptian magic is a massive boom at this time because of the finding of the Rosetta Stone and the translations of a lot of these Egyptian texts. So a lot of this magic takes on this Egyptian color, you know, and Cagliostro was deeply involved in Masonry, right? He had his own Masonic movement, and he gets killed in Rome for trying to build a Masonic church. That's what they kill him for, you know? He was a wild man and a charlatan and a forger.
Political too, involved in politics. So hit the next image.
But Catherine the Great is one of the most important and empowered, you know, figures of her generation.
Oh yeah. I threw in an image there of
Cagliostro.
You know, charlatan, politician, you know, trying to change the minds of royal courts and people with ancient magic, Solomonic magic at that, because it's the Egyptian Freemasonry. Let's hit the next image.
So weird, so wild.
Because we're still in the realm of that whole time. We were still in the whole realm of the King Louis still. I didn't even get to King Louis the 16th. That's where, you know, because you had the 14th, the 15th, and you get to the 16th, and he was involved with espionage and weird stuff because Cagliostro had to testify against King Louis in court. Yeah. It was it's called the affair of the diamond necklace. This is how tank and bring about the French Revolution was weird stuff going on with the diamond necklace and spies and courtesans and King Louis the 16th and a diamond necklace that gets stolen. And Cagliostro, they think he's the one who engineered the plot. And he goes in front of the French courts. And he's let go. But this is part of what sets in motion the French Revolution, because it throws doubt on Marie Antoinette as a agent provocateur. Yeah, look it up. It's very interesting. It's called The Affair of the Diamond Necklace. And it's connected to King Louis XVI, Marie Antoinette, a spy network, and Cagliostro. So around this time, it's King Louis, let them eat cake. It's the whole monarchy it's gone to their head. They're getting bourgeois, and they're just going they're just going taking it out. And you have something that's the French Revolution. Because they had a revolution in America. And it's the same Masonic people were involved in
Voltaire again, right?
Yeah. Same group of people involved in boom. Onto the scene comes Napoleon. Takes over. This is after King Louis. So before we had King Louis, and now we have Emperor Napoleon. It's a new form of an emperor that comes from a general. And I would encourage people, if you're into any of this stuff, go buy a book by Walter Bosley or check out his stuff. Next Level. He's an actual real agent and spy involved with the United States government, and has a series of books that go deep into all these characters.
Some of his stuff can be quite hard to find, but he has his own publishing house. He's worth supporting. He's got a great YouTube channel. Big inspiration for this show, Walter Bosley. Check him out.
Yeah. Next Level. And some of his work, he shows that maybe it was Napoleon's brother who went to the island instead, and Napoleon came to America because they looked alike. But one of the things about Napoleon, he was into Egypt. Was fascinated by Egypt, and we've heard all the different stories about Napoleon going to Egypt, going in the pyramid and different things, and the people he took with them to survey Egypt. And when he came back, he changed the French calendar to become the French Revolutionary calendar to end on September 16th. It's pretty interesting thing there. And Napoleon was into a lot of esoteric stuff. He was more into the occult in ancient history than he was into war.
He had to manifest a new mythology, right? He had to create a new vision of empire with him as a new king, and he wanted to manifest his own lineage, his own dynasty, right? So he was doing all of this Egyptian Solomonic empire magic that we love to talk about and poke at.
Yeah.
Right?
And even after he's imprisoned or whatever happens, there's people that were loyalists that wanted to resurrect Napoleon, like bring him back.
They send him to that island, right? Alba.
Yep.
They even take him, they do at one point get him back, right? This is the reason I know about this is because of Dumas, by the way, because this is a central plot point to the Count of Monte Cristo. And then, of course, I had to read it and find out what was actually happening. But yeah, no, Napoleon was banished to an island. And then at one point, the revolutionaries tried to bring him back, and then he gets sent back, and he dies of poisoning, right? They gave him arsenic in his food, and they killed him slowly over time.
The classic poison to poison the king. The king is dead. And the people around him, this is 1800, turn of the century there. His veterans formed a secret society. Go to the next image. Besides Napoleon being part of the Order of the Golden Phoenix, which is a very important thing. We'll talk about that in other episodes. But this sacred order is the Sacred Order of the Sulpicians. And that was founded by the veterans of the Egyptian campaign.
How interesting.
They came back and they had their own order. So they were loyalists, Napoleonic loyalists, as well as having their own order that's Masonic and Egyptian, that same Egyptian thread, because that's important with empire building. Because remember, Jesus goes to Egypt. All the patriarchs in the Old Testament go to Egypt. Alexander goes to Egypt to be made. It's part of you got to be made. The Pharaoh, Caesar goes to Egypt. If you're going to be an emperor, if you want to be next level, You can be a little king, but you want to, So this is formed by the veterans of the Egyptian campaign, and they came back and they were rewarded well after the campaign, but eventually they're turned on because of different orders at play there in France. They like revolutions, and around that time, besides them, there's a group. Go to the next image. Another secret society I want to talk about, which is the charcoal burners, the Carbonari, which come out of Italy, and they start doing revolutions too, around the area. And this is, I just was fascinated by their symbol. This is their symbol. So this is the political secret society, the Carbonari in Italy, and this is their symbol with the Alpha Omega keys. I clearly deal with the Opus Dei stuff and the Catholic stuff and Jesuit stuff, and you have your inverse cross along with your pentacle.
Wow.
It's pretty interesting. And that is their symbol if you type in the Carbonari, which is a secret society that was involved in revolutionary politics. That was their thing in Italy at that time.
There's so much going on with this symbol. It's so crazy.
For it to be a political organization. If it was just an occult organization, it'd be like, yeah, cool, magic, Solomonic magic. But this is for a political organization that was to overthrow or bring about revolutionary change in Italy.
But okay, I just want to point out what's going on here. Alpha and the Omega in the Greek. You have the star of Venus in the center. You have two crosses of Christ, but they're black and white, right? Invoking that pole, yin and yang, right? You have the tridents here at the top. Those are actually the spokes that you get on those Vegvisir, the Norse sigils. What are those called? Sorry. Yeah, Vegvisir is one of them, I think.
And these are also Catholic keys because this is in Italy. Because you'll see that key symbol with the Pope stuff.
That's true. You'll see it with the Pope stuff as well. And then you get the 3 here, which is Celtic symbology of the Trinity. Right? It's just wild stuff. Also the grapes, Dionysus.
For a political organization at that.
Political.
Yeah. So at this time, there's a lot of revolutionary stuff going on in Europe.
Wild.
For empire, people want to be emperors, czars. Because remember, a czar, or Katerina Zarita, a czar means a Caesar.
That's true.
Kaiser. And then German, that would be Kaiser. So at this time, speaking of Kaisers, there's another form of emperors that are actual emperors. Because we've talked about some of the Habsburgs emperors. Maximilian, the brother who went to Mexico, and they finally kicked him out of Mexico because they were trying to set up shop in Mexico. That Mexico was going to be a Habsburg dynasty, Austrian-Hungarian Empire, as well as we've talked about Venezuela, means Little Venice, was set up by Kaiser Wilhelm. Germany was expanding, and there are different Germanic elements around that. Because so the Austrian Habsburg, go to the next image. All right, I want to get into this thing because you have that KUK, the Kaiserling und Königling, for king and country, or the Kaiser. Again, we were talking about the Kaiser, the Tsar. But this I wanted to get into. It's an Austrian Hungarian Empire around 1850. You have a threat to monarchy going on all around the world. There's these revolutions throwing off the monarchy. And at that point, Austria-Hungary was going to kick all their asses and take over everything, and incorporated all this Hungarian, Central Asian, great game mythology, we'll call the Horde, Attila, all this older stuff.
Yeah, Golden Horde stuff.
Yeah, along with the Germanic, Prussian, Teutonic, Nordic.
Meets West.
Yeah. And it gets that Scythian. You get a lot of nice stuff intermixed to be an emperor of all that.
You see the same stuff with that. We were just talking about her, Catherine the Great. A lot of their mythology in Russia has a very similar East meets West, Golden Horde. We're born out of Kiev, right?
And incorporating all their different tribes. because at that point, the Austrian-Hungarian Empire started to add all these different tribes, all these different states, all these different countries brought in, Hungary, Romania, like it's and they had a lot of languages.
Yeah.
It became hard to control it. So they came up with something called the Evidence Bureau. This is called the Evidence Bureau, the first permanent secret police, state police, 1850. 17 languages.
Wow.
They had to control. They were going to control Germany, Italy, France. This is the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. Take over everything. This is how we're getting World War I. You know, this is the democratic people of the world of Europe. They're fighting against the monarchy and the emperors and the Habsburgs and the Romanovs and
what's left of the Holy Roman Empire.
Yeah. So they did it in America. Then they go to the French Revolution, and they're like, okay, we still got England. And so the Habsburgs like, well, we got to fight this. We need a secret police. And so this is like the MI6 or the KGB or the CIA. This is the first official boom that was, but multi-countries, because they had, like I said, 17 languages going on and fighting political and occult intrigue at that to overthrow the emperor. You know, Franz Joseph wants to be the emperor of all. Go to the next image. Because at the same time, we'll go back to Russia with Katerina Zarita. In Russia, other things were happening at this time. You had different powers had taken over, and we're still at a monarchy here. And this is something, I'll say it right. Petrashevsky Circle was a group of Russian intellectuals came together. Because remember, Katerina had the French Enlightenment, people that informed her. Now they have these Russian Enlightenments, and as part of the Petrashevsky Circle. One that was a famous one, his name was Dostoevsky. Crime and Punishment, different books that this novelist wrote. But this is where we get Russian utopianism, the birth of this. And I want to show this picture because this is called the mock execution. This is where this term came into play, of the mock execution. Because these were Russian intellectuals right here who were rounded up and sent to an execution line. And when they were set to be fired on, it was blanks. It scared the fuck out of them. Excuse my language. One went mad, crazy on the spot. And this is where we get this term, to scare them, because they wanted to overthrow the monarchy as well. But part of it, they also believed in that the West was going to fall, and Russia would overthrow the West as well. And so, you know, because they're informed by all these revolutions happening around the world, and they're all, well, hey, this is going to happen here, because this is a very stoic environment, let's say.
There's so much oppression, right? The serfdom in Russia is wild. There's a reason why.
That's the word, serfdom.
Right? The communist revolution takes off there, right? It's because of the incredible oppression.
Yeah. And that's where it's born out of. You get Bolsheviks, and with that Romanov, though, the Romanovs are interrelated to the other houses. They look the same. That's his cousins. If you were to put them back to back, it look as the same as the royal houses with the little mustaches. It's the cousins. You know, they're controlling the royal courts of Europe there. And so, and then in Russia, you have a bunch of serfdoms and a bunch of different tribes. And at this point, they try to get rid of and make a unified Russian identity, and get rid of some of these different tribal identities, and bring everyone under a unified Russian construct.
Yeah, this is a big thing that you see throughout this time in Europe, right? Is the solidification of these national identities and the establishment of more modern borders, right? And coming together. And a big part of that is creating a solid standardized language. We have the birth of these grand literature figures who wind up becoming these kind of central guys, like Russia, it's Pushkin, right? And he sorts of he kind of becomes something that everyone rallies around. In Germany, it's Goethe, right? And so you start to get the establishment of these centralized ideas through art.
Myth
And
makers.
exactly.
They have to make national myths
Yeah.
as the state evolves. Because before, in the original myth, it was a bloodline of a monarch, a divine right to this geography, and these people were based around him. Now, as the people are free, they have to have a mythological national identity.
Yeah, a new story, something to create. You have to create a new identity, a new enlightened ideal, right? And that's what you get out of these great literature characters of this time, like your Goethes and your Pushkins.
And so at the same time, they're involved in political intrigues, because if you have influence over the mind,
Yeah.
and you better best believe these secret police are coming to you, because once you got the evidence bureau that's famous around the Habsburgs, you have something that came out of France. Go to the next image. And this is called the Deuxième Bureau, Second Bureau.
Oh,
This
wow.
is French secret police, founded 1871 to deal with all this stuff. And in 1871, they were dealing with Elpheus Levi. They had a whole bunch of stuff to deal with, whether it's French English politics, Catholic Protestant politics, Prussian German Habsburg politics, Russian politics, occult politics, American politics, all that French politics, Napoleonic. They're dealing with the whole cusp of everything right here at the Second Bureau. Now this image shows him from more like the World War I era, or this movie that was produced in the 30s. But there are secret police in France that is an occult informed at that, because occult and politics go together at this point. All goes together, as well as theater and spycraft. Because in Europe, we see America so big, but in Europe, another country is a couple hours away.
That's true.
So French, England, German, and some of these people speak all languages. So this is when, at this point, okay, to break it down even more, to set the stage for what you're going to talk about, go to the next image. All right, this is Theodore Roos. This is 1885.
Ordo Temple Orientis.
Yes, he was the head of the stuff. Became the head of it, of the OTO, this Aleister Crowley type stuff. Aleister Crowley became the next Grand Poobah after him. Well,
yeah.
Let's talk about him for a minute. Because he was kicked out of England for being a Prussian spy. He was part of the Prussian secret police, this homie. And he was kicked out of England. And besides having his Masonic apron at that, it was involved in German and Prussian spycraft. This is like World War I, getting close to that era stuff, where it's involved with getting people killed. This deals with German, British, Russian politics. And he was involved in that stuff. And eventually he sided with the German, Prussian homies. Because what's funny, because he's involved with the Golden Dawn, Rosicrucian, Swedenborg, all very powerful organizations. And people even say that Crowley is sent to investigate them. That was his job, was to go investigate Theodore and Mathers. He was sent by the police. So but before we even get there, we're going to talk about, this is the same year. Okay. So 1885. Okay. There's a report published listing Blavatsky, Helena, as a Russian spy. And she had to be investigated too. Eventually, she hightails it to India, because she gets involved in Indian politics, in making gurus that are involved in politics in America, Europe, and India get involved in all their political arenas, even though she's a published report saying she's a Russian spy at that. And she's involved in this whole Great White Brotherhood myth-making thingy that the Nazis use as their mythological base, let's say, some of it. So 1890, Crowley. Go to the next image. There's Blavatsky right there. So, you know, in the end, she was busted showing that she had secret cabinets where she had tricks being done and fake spiritualist stuff, even though she's a genius author. Some stuff sounds really good. There's some other stuff that's very subversive. And she was doing some trickerations and making money and messing with politics. No doubt. It makes her spicy. Makes it more interesting to me at that.
It's one of these things with a lot of these people. She got her start debunking a lot of early spiritualists, and then later on she becomes, you know, the voice of the Mahatmas, and you know, no one else can know. None of you can see where my secret magical chiefs are, and maybe they're in Tibet, but oh, maybe they're not, and oh, I traveled all around the world and I've been everywhere. It's like, where did she actually go is a big, huge point of debate. You know, she's certainly brilliant, and there's certainly some charlatanry going on, you know, but yeah, I don't know.
And involved in politics. And this will help inform the next episode next week when we get into Nazi stuff in Guirdjeff and Dalai Lamas and all that kind of different things. But so, you know, part of the trips Crowley took to get these visas and have that money to do this stuff was to go do a little spying activity. It wasn't just to go do. They were like, oh yeah, here's your visa, Crowley. We need you to go to some other country and dress up as a pharaoh and pretend that you're having little sex magic stuff or whatever, which he did some kooky ass shit, but saying that he was funded to do that.
Well, it's so wild. It's like Crowley winds up in Mexico, you know, and he's doing this Crowley stuff, doing peyote, hanging out in these Freemasonic societies, but also these Freemasonic societies are invested in a revolution and in installing the next president of Mexico.
No, we talked about
Crowley. Why is Crowley all of a sudden there? And then he's in India and he's doing similar shit, right? Oh, he is hanging out with all these spiritualists and he's doing his thing, but at the same time, he's involved in politics.
Wherever there's Rosicrucians, you're going to have that Golden Dawn, Rosicrucians, any of that, just political stuff, intrigue happening. Go to the next image. I want to show this one photo. There he is. It's Baphomet. This is a certain character he took on when he was the Baphomet. And there he is in his military regalia, showing you who he is. Showing he ain't the pharaoh homie, the Grand Poobah wizard. He's a military agent that can put on many outfits, you know, and he reported back to the monarchy.
Wild stuff.
At that. So, because it's these trips, the visas, the money, because that's what he looked like before. We didn't see the image of him there when he's dressed up in the outfit all high, but this is what he looks like when he reports back to be debriefed. And we're going to go to a couple more images before you unpack this. Go to one more image. I maybe have one or two more images at that, just two more, because connected to him is A. Waite. Now, A. Waite, besides being a genius and all the other things that he did, he used to work for Horlick's Malted Milk for years. That's how he made a big part of his money and started the publishing, was through Horlick's Malted Milk. He worked for a company that had this special nutritional product, this special milk, this water of life milk, malted milk with this vitamins in it. And he published a magazine that would talk about the benefits of the milk, but it also would talk about occult and political discourses.
Wild.
It one of the, you know, was weird stuff. All the stuff he was into, we go into this next to ads for children's milk. You know, and one of the stories published in this magazine, the original place it was published, was by an author named Arthur Machen. His real name was Arthur Llewellyn Jones, but it's Arthur Machen, and he was famous from the turn of the century. Wrote the book Pan, about the god Pan, and famous occultist dude. But he was into some weird politics, and it was here in this Horlick's Malted Milk magazine that A. Waite published that we first get this story. Go to the next image. There it is. It's called The White People. It's a very famous horror story at that. But in it, he gets into weird stuff that deals with the Spanish Civil War. because he supported Franco in fascism. And this made it into subversive horror stuff that dealt with the white people and different weird, talking about Blavatsky and myth making, to start off in A.E. Waite's Milk magazine. Subversive turn of the century politics here, because you'll see the thread in the next episode clearly. Malted milk at that. Now let's go to the next image. Last image, last little story before you drive home. Turn of the century. What's going on? This Russian stuff, because we're getting into a lot of Russian stuff. All right. The Romanovs, at that point, 1905, you have Sunday Bloody Sunday happens. People think that's just a song from U2 for the Irish massacre, which is over a Protestant Catholic thing where they kill some prisoners, like the mock execution, but this time they really kill them. But the original Sunday Bloody Sunday happened on 1905. And this happened in Russia when they shot at the peasants who went to the Romanovs' capital, their mansion, the palace, and they took out the peasants. And that's starting the 1917, the whole Bolshevik thing, getting that rolling, because it's to let them eat cake moment. But at the same time, its character steps on the scene and ingratiates themselves to the Romanovs. And I could show you a lot of different pictures of Rasputin with the Romanovs and the whole family and how they loved him and everything. But I want to show you this picture with him next to the generals, so you can see his military power and what this is really about in the occult power of Rasputin. As crazy he can look in other pictures, he looks pretty together right there when he has the power behind him, what he's really up to, what he's really about. I ain't even going to go into the story of Rasputin. They tried to poison his ass and kill him. They couldn't kill him. But the whole world we live in is influenced by this stuff. The difference between the monarchy and the people and the Catholic and the Protestant and the cult and the socialists and the communists and the Democrats and the Republicans. And this is part of the culted nature of political world we live in.
Yeah. And the power to manipulate, the power to inspire, right? Regardless of what you think of Rasputin, he managed to convince people to follow him, to believe in him. He managed to get the ear of the Queen of Russia, right? It's a wild story. And he was a crazy mystic, engaged in the heights of radical free love and belief. Just magical stuff. Crazy stuff.
Empire building. Behind empires are weirdos.
Yeah.
Spies. We don't know what's really going on. Nothing is what it seems. So this is the world that Aleister Crowley's in right here.
Yeah. So wow, that was a great presentation. A lot of fun, Dion. Thank you. Do you want anything else you want to end us with Rasputin here, or
no? I just want this to be the setup for the world that Aleister Crowley's in the espionage, and this is where we're at. This is the time frame we're in, where information and the cult can influence our political beliefs.
Wild, right? So yeah, Crowley is such a crazy character. We're gonna have some fun here. So this whole started because I was asking myself, you hear all these stories. So Crowley was involved in all this espionage. And I wanted to know the truth of it. And so I started to look, and I found this really awesome book, really well sourced, really well researched.
Yeah.
And it's a great read, Secret Agent 666 by Richard B. Spencer. Richard B. Spence, sorry. So everything in today's presentation is mostly taken from this book, but it's just a great read. And I'm not going to delve through the full occulted history, but I wanted to talk about Crowley's early history, because it really shows you who Crowley truly is and why all these things are going on. So in this book, there's basically what the author is arguing is that Crowley in his early life in Cambridge is connected to British intelligence. He becomes an agent. And he starts to travel around, first to Russia and Switzerland, but eventually all over the place doing various things for the British Secret Service, you know. And there's a fair amount of evidence for this. A lot of it is through the you know, people's recollections, anecdotes. A lot of the hard evidence is missing, and a lot of it is occulted. And so the author really had to struggle to try and create a narrative, but they do a really good job of keeping it grounded in reality and admitting where speculation is. But the central idea is that Crowley's whole magical career begins as an act of espionage, right? He is sent to spy on the Jacobites. And we're going to get into this. So, first, I wanted to show you some of the background research that this book was doing and looking into stuff, because Crowley is, on one hand, one of the most famous people of all time. You know, he's one of the most influential British people. So you would think that the Secret Service would have something to say about all this. And the author went and talked to the Secret Service and wanted to know. And this is what happened. It says, MI5's initial reply in early 2003 was therefore surprise. I am afraid we are unable to help you in your quest for material in Crowley, it read. As contrary to your assumption, it would appear we have never had a file on him. The letter went on to explain that this was not necessarily as strange as it might seem, because despite his bizarre antics, the view may well have been taken that Crowley did not represent a threat to security. Was this an indirect admission that Crowley had collaborated with MI5, or at least that the agency had some assurance that his antics presented no threat? Not long after I received that letter, a 1930s MI5 document emerged from the Public Record Office, the main component of the British National Archives, that bore a cross-listing reference to another agency file, PP 2573 Crowley. Further evidence showed this was indeed Aleister Crowley. So I wrote again to MI5. After considerable delay, the ever-polite response began with an apology for having misled you when we said we thought you had never held a record for Aleister Crowley. In fact, the writer continued, my most recent letter has helped us establish that we did indeed hold a record of him under that PP reference. Sadly, it was destroyed, we think, in the 1950s, when large numbers of records seemed at that point to have outlived their usefulness and were destroyed. Furthermore, there was no indication, the letter concluded, as to why or when Crowley attracted our attention. So this is the setup. The Secret Service has all these documents on him, but they're withholding information and purposefully hiding it, and things have been destroyed and hidden. Right? And when he started to look, little pieces of cross-referenced information still remains, but the actual documents are gone. Right? So this would lead one to think that Crowley was indeed some form of a spy.
Well, how about this? If he takes over an organization of a person that was arrested for being a Prussian secret police, but you're not going to question him. So all the people he's connected to are arrested or have files and are famous for their involvement in politics, but you're not going to question him on, even though he has direct relationship to a Prussian secret police spy. He took over the order for him.
Right. That's so interesting with Theodore Rius.
Oh,
you're right.
no,
you have a notorious spy and they're directly connected. What? Why? Also, why?
But you're not going to question him, even though he's connected. So that's what I'm saying. I don't have to research Crowley. I have to research his friends. And if all of his friends have official paperwork, it's called receipts. They got to show me the paperwork.
No, it's interesting and it's wild. So what this book winds up basically contending is that Crowley is brought in, so we want to make it clear. There is this assumption that Crowley's spiritual awakening is legitimate, but it coincides with his spycraft and him being brought in to do spy work. So to begin, I wanted to talk about Crowley's early life because it's important to set up and understand the character and why he is or why he would be a spy. So first off, in his early life, one of the first things that he remembers from a young age is he went and joined cadets, and he was part of the first armaments or voluntary force. And when he went and joined the cadets, they made him swear an oath. And he references this much later in his life. He says, "Every time I perform an act in support of my original oath, I strengthen the link to England." And his original oath was swearing allegiance to Queen and country, to swearing allegiance to Queen and country. You know, infamously, Crowley has a really kind of rocky childhood. His parents were religious extremists. They were extraordinarily wealthy, middle class, but they did not treat their son well. But Crowley wound up having a really close relationship with his Aunt Annie and with other members of his family. And his Aunt Annie was a member of this society, the Primrose League. And the Primrose League was a conservative monarchist organization, but they were in favor of the current monarch. They were in favor of Queen Victoria, okay? And they were in favor of the current status quo. And this was a empowered society that existed to support these kind of conservative ideals. And this is the home in the life that Crowley grew up in. He swore allegiance to Queen and country at a very young age. And his family was involved in conservative politics. And there's a lot of speculation about whether or not he was a member of the Primrose League, because at that time it was a very occulted conservative organization. And I included here their declaration, so just so you can see what they're about. This is what people who became members would declare. And men and women were allowed to be in the society. It said, "I declare on my honor and faith that I will devote my best ability to the maintenance of religion, of the estate of the realm, and the imperial ascendancy of the British Empire, and that consistently with my allegiance to the sovereign of these realms, I will promote with discretion and fidelity the above objects, being those of the Primrose League, Imperium et Libertas, Empire and Liberty. Empire and Liberty." That's correct, Bruno. It was founded by Lord Randolph Churchill, right? And that is Winston Churchill's dad. Winston Churchill's dad. Okay. So this puts Crowley into this very orthodox, very supportive of the state philosophy from a very young age, right? This is his essential character. And we even saw that quote from him later in life. That was the defining oath that he made, was to England, right? To that conservative ideal. And so this is important because this is what is the kind of person who's willing to become a secret agent, okay? They talk about this at length in the book, as they say, to become a secret agent, you need two things. You need someone who's extraordinarily loyal to the state, that believes in the state, and you need someone who's also going to have loose morals and a willingness to lie and to be a charlatan and to manipulate. Crowley is this ideal figure in both of these regards because he is a charlatan. Let's be real here, right? No, I'm not saying that there isn't a lot of truth and honesty and magic to Crowley's magic, but he also manipulates and lies for his own gain.
Part of it is, can someone be a thief and a liar but still be loyal?
Right. This is interesting, right? This is interesting, and so this is kind of informing Crowley's early background, but where things really take off for Crowley is when he goes to school, right? Outside of the cadets and outside of English boarding schools, he eventually finds himself at Cambridge University. And in Cambridge University is where we think he meets his first political contacts and gets initiated into espionage work. So at this
Handler?
yeah. At this time, this is more speculation, but there's thoughts that two people came into Crowley's realm at this time. One we're certain of, one is speculation. The first one is this character here, and it is Everard, sorry, what is his name? Everard, I believe. Everard Fielding. Everard Fielding. Okay. And Everard Fielding, this guy, is a known Secret Service agent. Known Secret Service agent. Involved in politics in India. But more interesting is he's a psychical researcher. And he forms one of the earliest psychical research foundations. And he spends most of his life going around exposing fraudsters, spiritualists, and he's even connected to Houdini. And he's close friends with Crowley. They have a known relationship beginning from a very early age, right? From Crowley's time at Cambridge. And later on, this is one of these men, Fielding, is one of the people that is our strongest support of evidence later on that Crowley was an active spy. And they ask him about a lot of his Nazi work, for example, and he just comes out and says it. Crowley believed, he says that Crowley believed, he doesn't admit that Crowley was employed, but the implication is here. He says Crowley believed he was working in service of British Empire, and all of that stuff was satire. Was satire designed to try and ferret out Nazis and expose them, and that Crowley was exposing people, and he was connected to the Secret Service. So we know from a very early age, Crowley is connected to this man. They become very good friends. They're both deeply interested in psychical research, in the paranormal, and exposing fraudulent people, right? And later on in life, this man vouches for Crowley and his connection to at least serving British Empire, and vouches for his excuses, right? Because Crowley did write Nazi propaganda. And now we have to wrestle with this, But if these people are to be believed, it was in service of empire, and potentially it was even a form of secret service, like he was engaged in trying to ferret out Nazis. It's wild stuff.
But there is also a certain element of ideology that people did embrace during World War I, World War II. Even though they had nationalistic, they still had a bloodline thing. It's still, whether I'm loyal to England or Germany, I might still be loyal to my white skin, let's say. Or so that's where some of these country lines get crossed for a deeper held myth.
This is what we're going to start to see. This is where there's an interesting thing, because on the surface level, to an outsider, you look at something like the Primrose League, you look at Crowley and his conservative connections, and you go, that man is super conservative, right? He's going to be friends with other conservatives, but no, right? He represents a very pro-statist, and what he gets employed to go up against are real extremist conservatives, the Jacobites, right? These people for the House of Stuart, these Carlingists, people for the House of Bourbon,
Taking us back to Guy Fawkes, to the House of Stuart,
it's taking us all back to this same kind of. This is what, like, a lot of people, they wonder, okay, why would anyone be interested in the Golden Dawn? Why would anyone give a care about these weird occultists? Because half of these weird occultists are in these clandestine secret societies that are funding royalist agitators around the world and are engaging in insurrection. Okay? Like, there's serious reason. There's serious spycraft going on. And the implication is that's what Crowley is doing. He's investigating extremists.
But so along with that, so if I'm in this world of the cult that's creating or shaping politics through mythology, and some are pro-monarch, some are anti-monarch. What we have is competing occult mythologies that have subversive messages in either side, competing
Yeah.
for the minds of the
And also,
intellectual.
it's like even competing monarchies and competing levels, because
Yep.
like Crowley is still a monarchist. He's still a conservative. He's still even a radical occultist, which is why he can infiltrate these groups. So at the first surface, he appears like, oh yeah, he's totally one of them. But no, not at all. There's some serious, the differences may be subtle to the outsider, but they mean everything to the political machination, right?
Yeah.
They mean everything to the political machinations that are at play. So this character, we know that Crowley is friends with Fielding. Okay, we know that there's a deep connection there. This one is pure speculation, but this guy was also connected to Cambridge University at this time when Crowley was a young man. And this is William Morsley, I believe. What is his name? William Melville. William Melville. And William Melville he's the founder of the modern British Secret Service. He's Agent M. He winds up founding MI5 and MI6. He's one of the most important spies there is. And he's a notorious character. He would do a lot of infamous spycraft. And there's all these stories about the way he would engage in spycraft. And it involved a lot of charlatanry. And it involved associating with wild characters. You know, people like Crowley. You know, there's a story, for example, with this guy with Melville, where he says he had quit Scotland Yard. He's no longer working for Scotland Yard. And he sets up a competing private eye agency. And it's all so that people come check out so that anyone who comes and checks out his private spy agency, he can spy on. It's all a big ruse. And this is the kind of stuff that everyone's engaged in at this time. All this kind of wild ruses and wild games, you know? So this character is the main person behind British spycraft. He's working with Fielding, and he's in the vicinity of Crowley. And we know that Crowley is a conservative statist, a Tory, right? And is friends with Fielding. And in his earliest life, before he decides to become a pursuer of the occult and of magic and poetry, right, which becomes Crowley's life work, he first was at Cambridge trying to become a diplomat. And his earliest kind of things, he goes on a trip to Russia. And a lot of people speculate that his first trip to Russia was his earliest connection to the spy world. But his real big spy world begins with this man here, A.E. Waite. And we were talking about A.E. Waite. A.E. Waite, besides Helena Blavatsky and Crowley himself, is probably the most influential modern occultist, right? A.E. Waite popularized the tarot through his Rider-Waite deck. He translated Alpheus Levi's The Occult Magic into English, and that translation is still the definitive translation. And we'll see here, Crowley himself, his first foray into magic is through A.E. Waite. And now this is where things get weird. How did Crowley get an A.E. Waite book? Why is Crowley contacting A.E. Waite? Is it a genuine influence and interest into the occult? Or is it because A.E. Waite is a far-right Jacobite extremist, right? And people who are for the House of Stuart, people who are for return to Roman Catholicism, people who are deep in this traditional value. This is hard, like real powerful stuff in the occult world. And A.E. Waite is at the heart of a lot of this through his connection to the Golden Dawn and others. But what ends up happening is A.E. Waite writes this book, The Book of Black Magic and Pacts. This book has this incredible impact on Crowley. Crowley reaches out to A.E. Waite and needs to know everything about him, needs to know wants to find out about this secret society that he's involved in, wants to find out who these secret chiefs are, and they exchange a letter. He recommends him some books, but, Crowley remains unsatisfied. But this leads to an interesting thing. Then Crowley goes on another one of his escapades, one of his trips, a diplomatic excursion. This time he finds himself in Switzerland, right? He's in Switzerland. And while he's in Switzerland, he meets this interesting character named Julian Baker. Julian Baker. And Julian Baker is an occultist and a member of the Golden Dawn. And it's a weird story, and people wonder because Crowley said he didn't know who Baker was. But Crowley walks into the room with Baker, a noted alchemist, something that is really, taboo, that's not made to be made public. Crowley walks into the room with this man and just starts talking up the room about alchemy, starts going on this tangent about all the stuff that he knows. And so Julian lights up and comes completely intrigued. And they start exchanging correspondence. They become friends. And it's Julian Baker that introduces Crowley to the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, and of which A.E. Waite is a member. A.E. Waite is a member, right? Now, this gets Crowley into the Golden Dawn. He's in the right place at the right time to meet one of these characters, one of these magical alchemists. He says the right thing in the right way to get a meeting. He goes to the English Lodge and he manages to prove himself to the people at the British Lodge, which is Yar and William Butler Yeats, among others, who are part of this group. Now, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn is a complicated group. The Heretic Order is a complicated group in that their politics isn't expressly clear, and there are different degrees and levels to the organization in terms of who's in charge. So at this time, there's this man who's the leader, or the main empowered person, and that is Gregor Mathers, and he is the head of the church, of this occult group, the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. But he's left England and he lives in Paris. And so in his wake, Yar and William Buster Yeats, have sort of taken over, and they man the British group. And there's a very strong difference in outlook. McGregor Mathers is a staunch Jacobite royalist extremist. He's part of this idea in Europe at the time called legitimists, who are trying to establish the Carling dynasty everywhere. And so he's doing work in Paris, in France, to fight against the revolutionary actions there, to try and go about restoring the Bourbon line on the throne. He's directly involved at this point in Spanish politics, where they're fighting.
That's what I'm saying. That was why A. Waite was publishing subversive stories in his Malted Milk magazine. And this deals with Spanish Civil War with Francisco Franco. Yep. Another dictator.
Well, Franco comes later, but Franco comes out of all of this crazy nonsense. He's a result of all this goddamn nonsense, because at this time you got this guy, Don Carlos, who is he's the Bourbon line. And there is an attempted revolution in the 1870s. I believe it's 1876. And he gets exiled, gets kicked out, but they never stopped trying to overthrow the Spanish government. They never stopped trying to bring this Carling back. And Gregor Mathers, the head of the freaking Golden Dawn, is a massive legitimist to the point where he's living in Paris, fighting to get Don Carlos onto the throne of the Spanish crown, trying to return a Bourbon to the Spanish crown. It's wild stuff that a lot of people are just unaware of, the political machinations that are going on, and this is stuff that is directly opposed to British rule, right? Directly opposed to Crowley's form of statism. This is extremist Jacobite stuff, right? So that's who Gregor Mathers is, but he's in Europe, and Crowley he's in France, and Crowley's in the UK, right? And Crowley is not really getting along well with the people at the British office. You know, they think he's an upstart. They think he's moving too quickly. They think he's a know-it-all jerk who writes bad poetry, you know, and they're worried that he may be a plant. Some people even speculate that he's such a tryhard, and it's such a weird scenario. They get all these bad vibes from him. They think he may be a plant. You know, this is a secret society that prides itself on being ultra exclusive.
Double agent.
You know, they don't want Crowley around. You know,
that's the term, double agent. That's
go ahead.
That's a big problem in this whole world, is when you're a double agent. Yeah. It's your loyalty. How can you be a liar and a loyalist at the same time?
It's wild stuff. It's wild stuff, right? This was an interesting thing from the Secret 666 book that I liked. I just wanted to share, talking about Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. It says, these powerful beings worked in mysterious ways, and whether they were human was debatable. As mentioned, Crowley compared the secret chiefs and their mysterious ways to the heads of an intelligence service, noting that both spy chiefs and secret chiefs keep us in the dark for precisely the same reason. So at the heart of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn is this idea of the secret chiefs, these mystical masters, similar to Blavatsky's Mahatmas, you know, but different, or of like, you know, the Rosicrucians have their mystery guys. This is a common theme in a lot of these occulted groups. And the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn had the secret chiefs. But Crowley talks about them as secret agents, and he views them through the lens of secret agents, right? They obscure things for the benefit of everyone, and only those who need to know get to know the truth, right? And it's for our own benefit. There's this needed hierarchy, right? There's this lens this is the lens through which Crowley is viewing his world, right?
So question, does Crowley become the head of the Golden Dawn?
No, I'm about to get into that. We'll get into it soon. So I wanted to talk about the Jacobites, because this is super important at this time, right? We just said that the head of Mathers is a Jacobite, right? And this whole idea of the Jacobites can be summed up in this line here. I got this from Wiki. It says, these were the divine right of kings, their accountability to God, not man or parliament. Secondly, that monarchy was a divine institution. Thirdly, legitimism, the crown's descent by indefeasible dynastic right, which could not be overturned or annulled. And lastly, the scriptural injunction of passive obedience and non-resistance, even towards monarchs, of which the individual subject might disapprove. Right? This absolute submission to the divine right of kings and to the blood of kings, to the dynastic rule, to the Carling line, right?
Solomonic at that. And that is your divine right, so to be the king.
This is this, you know, we saw this is the same stuff that inspired freaking Guy Fawkes. This is huge issue. This is a huge issue for British Secret Service. And this secret society is loaded with a bunch of these Jacobites. So Crowley has reason to infiltrate. Here's a really interesting guy. This guy is Ashburnham, I believe. Let me just see. Yeah. Bertram Ashburnham, the 5th Earl of Ashburnham. And this guy was, now it's debated whether he was a actual member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn, but he was certainly a close personal friend of Crowley and a close personal friend of Gregor Mathers. And he was a rich earl who had holdings in Wales. And he also founded another secret society which Mathers also belonged to, which was called the Secret Order of the White Rose. And this was a Jacobite society, a legitimate society that worked throughout the UK for Jacobite interests to support the right of the original bloodlines to return to the throne, to resist Queen Victoria, to resist, and to help out those efforts that Mathers was investing in Spain, right? So at this point, Ashburnham is actually invested so much in Spain that he is training people to use guns and armaments and how to fight the war. And he's inspiring loyalists to potentially join a coup d'etat, right? And Crowley actually goes down to Wales because he has training from his cadet days and how to use weapons. And he goes and he uses a machine gun, training with Ashburnham and with Mathers. Okay. Where it gets so crazy is this is Don Carlos. This is that king who they want to put on the throne. What ends up happening is in 1898, there's a war going on between the US and Spain. And it's over a bunch of different holdings. Cuba is the main one. The US wants Cuba. They want to free Cuba. They want Cuba to no longer be subject to Spanish rule. And all at the same time, they want to free the Philippines and they want possession of Hawaii. They want possession of Hawaii. And this is all under the time of President McKinley. So it's a crazy, wild time. But what ends up happening, right, is the Americans win. They beat the Spanish government. They manage to free Cuba and the Philippines, and they take Hawaii. So the Jacobites, they see this as a grand opportunity. The Society of the White Rose mobilizes. Crowley literally goes to Spain. He goes to Spain with Mathers and with Ashburnham, and they fight in a coup d'etat to try to install Don Carlos. But here's where it gets even more wilder. No one knows fully what happened, and Crowley refused to talk about it for his entire life. There's only one documented reference that the author could find, and he just says, I can't talk about that right now. I have sworn I can't say anything. I'm bound to secrecy. Maybe at another time. Just know that that's a story I can't tell. It's like, what is he doing? What is he doing involved in these monarchist revolutionary acts, fighting with these magical secret societies abroad? It's crazy shit, espionage shit. But our story doesn't end here. This is just the pretext to what Crowley's real work is about. So
if I could say one thing real quick, Snappy, I just looked it up just to make sure.
Absolutely.
Don Carlos is related to the Romanovs.
Of course he is.
Yeah, because that's what I'm saying. At that time period,
they're all
related.
Look
at the Habsburgs, the Romanovs, Mountbatten. You look at all the royal houses are interrelated. And even though it seems like it's a different nationalistic identity, the monarch that they're trying to install on the throne is interrelated. They're all interrelated.
All interrelated. And so you asked about the ending of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. What happens? So what ends up happening is after the failed coup d'etat in Spain, it fails. Ashburnham has to return home. Crowley returns home. But now, what ends up happening is the British side doesn't want to, we'll read this here. This is talking about the schism. And so this is from the book by Spence, and it will show us what led to the schism. It says, the schism came in late 1899 when members of the senior second order led by Farr and Yates refused to grant the upstart admission to the Adeptus Minor grade. An enraged Crowley rushed to Paris and convinced Mathers to initiate him, thus driving the wedge between Mathers and the London group. Later, Mathers dispatched his young acolyte back to London in a bizarre and brazen attempt to take physical control of the order. In a black mask, In a Highland garb, brandishing a ceremonial dagger, Crowley stormed about the lodge but failed to cow its denizens. He and Mathers ended up expelled from the order, which triggered its irreversible disintegration. So far as the order is concerned, the beast's probable aim was not to destroy the Golden Dawn, but to undermine the Jacobite Mathers' authority. In the aftermath, their superficial friendship quickly degenerated into mutual charges of fraud, blackmail, and attempted murder by magical means. Crowley's allegations against Mathers included Jacobite conspiracies to overthrow the throne of England. That probably was the truth. Later still, in his novel Moonchild, Crowley thinly disguised Mathers as a German spy and the tool of an evil cabal of magicians called the Black Brotherhood. They were the enemies naturally of the benevolent Great White Brotherhood. Crowley's joining the Golden Dawn with the ulterior motives of a spy and a provocateur is entirely consistent with a sincere interest in magic. He had the opportunity to milk the order for the possibly meager knowledge it could provide. His determination that the Holy Order of the Golden Dawn's leadership was full of posers, swindlers, and traitors simply made its ruination that much easier.
Mm-hmm. Well,
And that's what I went with.
well, you can see clearly Theodore Roos is expelled from England for being a part of the Prussian secret police. Crowley takes over his leadership of a secret society called the OTL.
Right? And he removes all of its political aspirations and turns it into a self-empowerment sex cult. I mean, it
And
always
then
had the sex cult aspect, but all of that political Nazi stuff goes away with Crowley.
now imagine here, Crowley is sent to Mathers ahead of another secret society that's involved in political machinations, and he destroys him too, and to try to take over the order. He's sent there in his John D capacity from Cambridge or Trinity College or wherever they're doing their hoo-ha from for these empire building tasks. The sun never sets on the colony. And we didn't even really get into his Egypt, India, America. There's a whole nother element of
there's levels of stuff. The stuff he does in the world wars, like we could go on and on about Crowley. I just wanted to talk about this because it's his initiating magical act is also his initiating spy act.
And so this sets the stage for next week when we get into the SS and the Thule and the Viril and the Nazis and with the Dalai Lama and Guirdjeff and Parsons and Mata Hari and
we have to talk about Edward Butler Lytton. Science fiction and magic, it's all interconnected, all of this stuff and politics, it's all here.
Werner von Braun. What's going on? This is where we get into this era of rockets and spacecraft. Things change. This is when we get social media. We get the printing presses. Everything's what is what. Who is who. And this is where we get Germany separates from the Habsburg yoke and the England versus France, and people team up that were traditionally enemies. It's the chessboard changes. If we look at Europe and America as a giant chessboard, it changes every now and then.
You get the birth of new ideological identities and new manifestations of state and empire and power, right? The German Empire, it has to be born through a new German conception, something that didn't exist. This is actually a huge issue for the National Socialists in the beginning. They have to manufacture that history. We now joke about that Aryan root and all that stuff to the ancient past, but unlike the other powers of Europe, they didn't have that. That German nation was new, right?
And that's why Himmler was good for that. He sought out to build those myths. You got Jacob Goethe, or Burma. You got a lot of different stuff that we'll see that and I even looked into Jung. You know, Jung was called Agent 488.
Of
No, I'm
course,
telling you, Freud, they're all involved. You can't be an intellectual during a time of world upheaval and not be involved. There's no way. They come knocking on your door.
Well, eventually we're even going to get to modern stuff. Like, who's that guy from the Temple of Set?
That's Kino. And it's
Kino.
Egyptian. Once again, it's informed by the Egyptian myth making and empire building to control it. It's the military controlling. Aquino is Crowley. It's the same thing. It's a military based Temple of Mars, we call this. Because
Right.
to me, politics is a mystery, right? And we look at Athena and Artemisian and all these different types of mystery rites, Dionysian, Eleusis. But Temple of Mars, that's an uncomfortable one to get into. But it's one that, so much so that our leaders that are into the Temple of Mars actually want to go to Mars. You know, so they have a mystery rite. So just so you know, there's other mystery rites on the planet, though, that deals with Ares and Mars.
Yeah.
They don't always just get to push everything about, because there's the power of love, the power of art, the power of creativity. There's other powers messing about.
Yeah. But that, that Mars power is pretty rough.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. So with that, the blacksmith will control the chaos and shape it into something that's positive, a tool of healing and change. And that's what the blacksmith's role is to take over the chaos. That's the rule. Just saying.
That's beautiful. Yeah, we need Hephaestus. We need Athena. All right, everyone. This was so much fun. Any final words to leave our audience with, Dion?
Left, right, blue, red, Democrats, Europe, America, all the same. We just humans. We breathe air. We love each other. And, let's relax on all the political shit. We're going to go deeper next time, because now we're going to get into modern politics. Bolshevik, Soviet, Nazi, Democrat, Republican,
Yeah, we're getting closer and closer to our current time, and that means that things are going to get more and more personal.
Yeah.
But we got to talk about these things. We got to recognize the myth and the manipulation that's at play. And regardless of what you think of the powers involved, recognize that it's power and it's about manipulation. And this is happening regardless of what you think.
We eat it for breakfast. I pledge allegiance to the flag. God bless the Queen. Whatever we're taught. I was saying these little nursery rhymes since I was a little bitty kid. So now we're going to change the nursery rhyme, the power of myth, Joseph Campbell style. We're going to be the hero in the myth. Why not?
Why not? Why not empower ourselves? Why not reject that empire myth? All right, everyone. This was fun. Tune in next week when we're going to dive deeper into the world of espionage, and we'll get up to more crazy occult shenanigans. Thank you guys for joining us. Peace and love. Take care.